Welcome to the Hughes, Hubbard Anti-Corruption and Internal Investigation Practice Group's podcast, All Things Investigations. The Hughes, Hubbard Anti-Corruption and Internal Investigation Practices Group represents many of the premier companies around the world, providing advice on issues spanning the full anti-corruption and compliance spectrum. In this podcast, host Tom Fox and members of the Hughes, Hubbard Anti-Corruption and Internal Practice Group will highlight some of the key legal issues involved in white-collar and other investigations, both domestically and internationally. We will tackle topical issues involved in investigations, as well as explore how companies can prevent and detect issues that arise in conducting investigations on a worldwide basis. We take things in a little bit different direction today as Mike DeBernardis interviews Darryl Cyphers about the importance of culture in a compliance program and organization. I know you'll enjoy this special episode.
Darryl, thanks for joining on this first part of this new 5-part series we're launching, where we are really trying to get insights from compliance personnel, in-house compliance personnel. I think in this podcast, we're typically hearing from me or other outside lawyers about different topics, and I think our audience will like a break and to hear from the people who are living it day to day. So welcome, Darryl.
Great to be here, Mike. Great to see you again.
And so, Darryl, you're the Senior Director for Legal and Compliance at Klaviyo. It's, as I understand it, essentially the senior most full-time compliance job at the organization, which is great. So I think you're going to have some good insights, particularly on the topic we're discussing today, where, as you and I discussed, we're going to cover culture, compliance, and the human factor, really talking about setting the compliance culture within an organization, some of the traps that come up, some of the tips and how to make it work better. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I think a good place to start is to get your thoughts on, we hear this term culture compliance all the time. I think, frankly, it's probably used a little bit too much and where it's lost a little bit of meaning. When you think about that term, though, and I know it's important as you're working at a company, how do you define it in a general sense? And then probably more so, how do you know if you haven't?
It's interesting because I feel like every year that may change a little bit more. When I first started in compliance, it was very heavy on the 7 elements of an effective compliance program, where you had those elements. And if I get these check boxes, then we have an effective culture. We have an effective compliance program. If I get 90% of my training completed, if I get 95% of my training completed, I'm good. But then all of a sudden the DOJ threw in a wrench of effectiveness, right? How do you define effectiveness? Which creates the question, how do you define a culture of compliance? And I think that there's a variety of ways that you can interpret a culture of compliance. One of the ways that we think about things are through metrics. One of the metrics that we use, we look quarter over quarter into where some of our investigation data comes in and try to see if we have a trend going up, going down in certain areas and certain regions of the world. But we also look at things like how often are our policies being looked at by employees. So we have our internal website where we have a policies and procedures page. How often is it being leveraged? We created an AI chat box that is there to interpret our policies for us. We utilize Google Notebook LM. We put all of our policies in there and then allows the chat box to then go in and provide an answer to questions employees may have on policies. And within that Notebook LM, it gives you statistics of how often individuals are accessing the chat box. So we'll look at that. So trying to understand engagement through website traffic as well as our chat box. And then we do things like our ethics week, where we go around to our offices around the globe and we get in front of employees and we talk to them about different scenarios and get their feedback on how they understand what our code of conduct is and what our culture is and what we're trying to achieve with our values. And then last but not least, we've introduced a test out option for our organization. So if individuals passed a certain compliance test for that year, they wouldn't need to take the online training. And so their understanding of our policies and procedures through this test, the success rate also kind of gave us an indication that employees get it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to put a pin in that and come back to that. And you said something that I think I probably should have started with as our audience is trying to get a sense for picking up tips and different practical uses out of this. Can you give us a quick 30-second on Klaviyo in terms of geographic scope, all of that stuff, so people can kind of try to right size what you're saying?
Sure. So Klaviyo is a marketing automation company, a CRM. We have global locations in Ireland, Singapore. We have Sydney, London. Our headquarters are in Boston. We have San Francisco office. So we're all around the globe. We focus on marketing automation. So essentially through email, SMS, messaging, we help e-commerce brands primarily grow their brands through targeted marketing search with AI intelligence.
Okay, excellent. So you guys are already, I think, just by nature of your business, maybe a step ahead in terms of leveraging technology.
Yes.
It's interesting to hear, though, that that's not just on the sales side, it's not just on the operations side. We're using it on the compliance side as well. What type of insight does it give you? Let's say you've got a couple months where now we've got a lot of employees engaging with our AI chat box. What is that? And it's going to depend month to month, I'm sure, but what kind of feedback does that give you? Does that say maybe we need more training, or maybe, hey, this is working?
It just, for me, it lets me know that like employees are curious and they're trying to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, employees could just say, I'm just going to do what I want to do. I don't care if there's a policy or not, but ignorance is not bliss. So essentially, when they're engaging with us and going to our policies page and they're trying out the chatbots, that gives me an indication that they have a hunger to want to do things the right way.
Yeah.
And so I'm always very encouraged by high usage of the chat box, high usage of our policy page, as well as disclosures when employees speak up and raise concerns. I'm very encouraged by it because it means we're doing something right. So often employees are not comfortable speaking up and they prefer to just keep it to themselves. But when we created a culture where individuals feel comfortable speaking up, whether it's through their third-party hotline, whether it's through a manager that relays it to HR, or whether it's to us directly on the integrity team, that means something. That means we're getting it right. And there's going to be that one time where someone discloses that big thing where you really know all the hard work was worth it.
Yeah. A few years ago, I was serving on a team that was a compliance monitor for a company, and the company was very sheepish about showing us the number of reports coming into their hotline. They were viewing it as a sign that something wasn't working in their system. And it actually was, I think we gave them the same message you just gave, that it's really a sign that employees are comfortable and asking questions and bringing these things up. It's a sign of a program is working when you're getting the reports and able to address them appropriately. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people forget how difficult it is to raise a concern, all the things that can go through an employee's mind, right? They're thinking, oh, am I going to be retaliated against? Or do I have all the information? And what does this mean if I am putting the wrong information out? Am I going to be looked at the wrong way? So there's a lot that goes through individuals' minds. And so when they do take the time to speak up, I'm very encouraged and I feel like we've created a space to where employees feel safe.
Yeah, that's great. In my experience, and I assume this is similar for you, in order to really create a culture of compliance, it can't just be the compliance department out there doing it themselves, right? There has to be buy-in from the various other departments, and the business has to be on board. HR, all these different aspects. One, do you agree? And then two, if that's the case, practically speaking, how do you go about trying to partner with these various other departments, partner with the business to create this culture?
Well, I think it's two very different answers for your question, right? So partnering with HR, we'll start there. Historically, in my career, there's always been some friction between HR and like ethics and compliance, right? Because there's a lot of overlap. You wonder who owns what, and it takes a lot for both teams to want to be totally transparent with each other about their practices, their processes. Are we following our processes? And so there's a lot of work there, but it's super important, right? Because at the end of the day, when an employee is having an experience, whether they're disclosing something or they need some information or anything, they're not going to say, oh, our ethics team is terrible or our HR team is terrible. They're going to say that our company is terrible. They're just going to put a large large label on it. So it's important that we understand that and we work in partnership, because if one side is not doing their part, if I'm not doing my part, it's going to mess it up for everybody. So that's the HR piece. As far as the business piece, I think we've always tried to talk about our function as business partners. We're not looked at as the Department of No, but how do we enable you to accomplish what you need to accomplish, but within the law? And I think that approach is one that takes down the guard from the business and allows them to understand that we're thinking strategically as business partners, and that we understand there's a mission, right? Every company needs to make some money and it's going to have to take some risks and want to do international expansion, right? My job is not to say, no, you can't do this. My job is to understand the scenario, provide them with the best information possible, and encourage them to go into the right direction.
I think it's such a good point. Really, the biggest differences for the companies I think struggle with this are when compliance is the Department of No, right? And when the business does not look at compliance as a partner, but more as this, you're my roadblock and getting done what I need to get done. And it's easy said. I think it's more difficult to do in practice. Is there anything that you've done or tried to do to build that type of relationship, other than just sort of repeating it over and over again?
You have to understand the long game, right? If you get the label of Department of No, there's a good chance that you're not going to be in the know at all.
Yeah, fair.
If you're not in the know at all, how do you prevent risk? And that's our whole responsibility, right? Is to help navigate the business to make sure that they're not making lousy decisions. So you have to kind of understand that there's an element of playing the game, that we can't just immediately freak out when we hear something that we say a flag. Understanding it's a red flag, but how do you communicate that red flag effectively so that the business kind of really can comprehend the risk and the understanding of the law without them totally turning you off? I think it's a very critical thing that you are likable in our function, right? That the business enjoys talking to you. Maybe you just have a regular conversation with business leaders every now and then that has nothing to do with what's going on with the business. You say, hey, yeah, how you doing? Like, how you check out that Boston game the other day? You check out that Celtics game, right? Just so they can have like some type of relationship outside of the high risk areas that we always have to engage in. Building those relationships on a personal level, business level, allows you to kind of have more skin in the game and their ear a little bit better when you're having those tough conversations, because there are times where you say, hey, this is a no-go.
Yeah. One of the things I see come up is, how do you deal with this balance of being responsive? Because as a compliance officer, I know you have to be responsive to the business, but also building in sort of the precedent that, hey, you guys can't come to me at the very last minute. It's this tension. I always see this, right? My clients will come to me and say, hey, the business just threw this on me. Now I need it tomorrow morning. I know we need to be responsive, but part of me just wants to say, sorry, you can't throw something on me at 8:00 at night. How do you strike that balance?
The interesting thing, Mike, so the other day I was on a call with Hema. Hema's a really well-known person in the compliance industry, and we were talking about like risk assessments, and she likened it to Waze, the app. And as I was thinking about what she was saying, and I was thinking about my approach to compliance in scenarios like that, it really resonated me, the Waze app, right? Like, no matter what you do, Waze is going to go to the intended destination. So whether you give it the route you want to go an hour before or 5 minutes before you need to be there, it's going to give you the directions that you need to go. And sometimes you may go off course. Waze doesn't complain. It just gets you to where you need to go. And so I think as compliance professionals, especially in a field like mine in tech, where things are moving a million miles a minute, we have all these AI technologies now at our fingertips, and everyone wants to try to create something new and create new technologies, that I don't think we have the luxury to continue to push back and say, hey, I need 2 weeks before you. At this point, it's just all hands on deck. What needs to get done? And hopefully over time, individuals start understanding and having respect for your function to where they can give you that heads up. But I also think that oftentimes the business rarely has the heads up itself. That this was something that popped up last night. OpenAI is doing this now. We need to do this. Boom, boom. And you're going.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of the situation, at least in the scenarios that I've been in the past.
Yeah, I like that. I like that analogy. I think that's a good one. So if we shift gears a little bit to I think, especially building out a program, when you're starting from scratch, I've often told clients training and communication are critically important. You have to start just sort of pumping this into the bloodstream of the company, like with regular doses over and over again. Set up a message, set up a schedule for communication, set up regular trainings. Even if employees say, we're tired of hearing it, you want to just kind of build that, build up the antibodies. It's a little bit different for a mature program, but obviously training and communication remain important. But you've already sort of alluded to this. You have employees who sort of start to get pretty annoyed with the training, consider it burdensome. I think you mentioned the testing out, which I think is a really interesting concept. What mistakes do you think companies make with respect to training? Because I think you can overtrain. Anything else you think that companies maybe do too often or don't do enough that kind of backfires when it comes to compliance training?
I think specifically now, with all the new AI technologies out there and capabilities that can come at your fingertips in a matter of hours, we're not pushing hard enough in this space to get exactly what we want. When I first started in the compliance industry, there was cookie cutter trainings. You had people wearing ties and suits, but I worked in Silicon Valley. No one wore a tie and a suit. So immediately when an employee starts taking this training and sees that, this is not even relevant, or this doesn't feel relevant to me because this is not my everyday life. And so over the years, you start seeing these companies changing their approaches, trying to mix it up a little bit suit and tie, a little bit Silicon Valley style, which is great. And we have to continue to innovate and push the bounds there. I think that there's a variety of different ways that you can reach the employee to get your message across. We gave employees this year 3 different options. We had an in-person training, which we did scenario-based. So historically, what we had done was you did an hour-long training with our employees in person, and we had different business leaders throughout the organization come in and talk about their functions in relation to the code of conduct and what their expectations were. We have a pretty strong employee base. We don't have a lot of turnover. And so the following year, we knew we had the luxury to do something different. So we actually did a scenario-based training this year, and we cut it down from an hour to 30 minutes. And so we gave our employees multiple scenarios, and we asked them, how would you handle this situation? And it was a very collaborative conversation filled with information of how they can find the right answers and reach out to the right policies or reach out to the right teams. And then the second option was our code of conduct training, which we utilized with our platform vendor that's doing some really creative things with AI. We made sure that the content really spoke to our employees. And so we took out some of the videography that they do in there, and we just put in some slides that really kind of fit in with our culture and with pictures of Boston and everything like that. So it really met with our culture, and that went well. And then we gave employees the last option, which is if you took the code of conduct training last year and you feel like you can pass this test, go ahead and shoot for the test out option. And so what it communicated to employees is that we understand that there's different people at different levels within the organization. And so here's some options for you. If you're crunched on time, maybe the 30-minute training is good for you to come in person so you can get it out the way. If you want to take the online training for convenience, you can do that. Or if you think you have the knowledge based off of last year's training, go ahead and try to take the test out. And that gives employees the sense of, hey, you're trying to meet me where I'm at. You're trying to be flexible here. And I think that they appreciate that.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was at my daughter's parent-teacher conferences today, and we were talking to our math teacher, and she was saying it's the beginning of the year, we have people who are at different places in their math. And so what we try to do is give them options, because the last thing we want is for a kid to be sitting here. We're covering a topic that they already know really well, basically at a speed that's too slow for them or just not where they're learning. And now they're checking out, right? Now they're not paying attention. So we do these different options. You can, okay, if you're past this, you move on, you grab this practice test and you move to the next session, or you can move faster or slower. So I think it sounds like this is just an educational framework that works at all levels. So it's interesting you guys are implementing it here.
Yeah, I think you mentioned mature companies and how it could be difficult for them. And I think oftentimes what happens, I started my career at a very mature company, but I remember at the time the chief compliance officer there, she told me like, hey, the work that you do matters. And whether you're at a startup with a bunch of young employees, or whether you're at a company that's been around for 100 years and everyone seems to know everything, the work that we do still matters. There's still a point in an employee's career where they could be faced with a decision that is very tough for them. And having the knowledge of an effective compliance program in the back of their mind will help them when they need to make a disclosure.
So I want to talk about, I think that the area why it's most important to establish this culture of compliance, and that's navigating these gray areas. Compliance is easy when the rules are clear, right? Compliance is easy when you can say, yes, this is obviously allowable, this is obviously not allowable. It's much more difficult both for you as a compliance officer and the business when things are a little gray, right? So first, I guess, what's your approach when the rules clearly don't apply to a situation? And I assume this comes up regularly. And I refer to these as gray area situations, but how do you approach those situations?
I think there's power in the diversity of thought. And so when you bring in multiple business partners that can come in with different perspectives, I think that allows for a more collaborative and more effective push to a direction to whatever your company chooses. So for example, when we have our acceptable use policy within the organization of who cannot use the platform, it's not something that I do by myself. We have leaders of the communications team on there. We have our deliverability and compliance leaders on there. We have other lawyers from the legal team on there. As we kind of run into these scenarios, we talk about it. We talk about how we feel about certain things and what are the risks from a reputational perspective, from a legal perspective, from an operational perspective. And then collective, we make our choice and we send it up to our leadership team. So that's the first thing. I think it's super important that you have core pillars of individuals in the organization that are well trusted and looked at very highly throughout the organization in collaboration and making those decisions so you're not making them by yourself. And then other times, I think that it's our responsibility as kind of compliance professionals to make sure we're gathering the facts. And sometimes we do have to take a stance. For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I had to lead the effort of, hey, what are we going to do here? Are we going to continue to allow our platform on Russia, or are we kind of going to take a step back given all the additional sanctions that are on them now? Are we going to take a step back and maybe you'll make a different choice? It's not against the law to do business with Russia, but how do we feel about what's taking place there? And so I compiled a bunch of information together, pulled all the Russian customers that we used to have, pulled all the Ukrainian customers that would be impacted. And collectively with leadership, we decided that we would support Ukraine with free accounts and that we would pull all of our business out of Russia. Now, this was an effort where we understood and presented the financial impact, how many customers you had, how much revenue that meant for us, and then what it would mean to give Ukraine free access to our platform. A holistic approach that's looking at it from a business end and an ethical end and a legal end allowed the leaders to make the judgment from those three lenses and make a collective decision. That was what we were going to do. So that was a gray area I felt like that we got right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned you talked to leadership of the company about those issues and work together. As we're talking about building a culture of compliance, as we're talking about sort of helping the business and really help everybody work through these gray areas, maybe this is a softball question, but how important is tone at the top in all of this?
I think tone at the top is critical, right? Because if you don't see the behavior from individuals that you're aspiring to get there, or individuals that you look to for guidance, if you look at leaders as your mentors or the example, it makes our job so much more difficult, right? When you see leaders that are not following certain policies. Let's take like a travel and expense policy, and it applies to everyone. And then you see leaders that have a disregard for it. What is that telling those below? That it only matters for like people not in this position, or it matters for everyone? And so I think if you're going to achieve a culture of compliance, it starts with your leaders. That's why in our code of conduct training, that's why in our code of conduct, the first person that you hear from is our founder and CEO, AB. And he gives a strong message about what he believes and what his vision is for this organization. Everything that we do, for example, in our code of conduct, we integrate it with leaders throughout our company. So we started off with AB, and then we go into some different topics. And then the next person you see is our CFO. And she's talking about certain things and how the code of conduct applies to her and her finance team. And then it moves on, and we go into Landon, who's our chief legal officer, and he talks about the importance of following policy and everything like that. And then we wrap up with our chief people officer, right? So they've invested the time to put out that message because it matters, right? They like, hopefully people think, yeah, I'm going to listen to Darryl, but I think more importantly, they're gonna be like, no, I'm going to listen to AV. I'm going to listen to Landon and Landon. I'm going to listen
Don't
to
sell yourself short. They're listening to you. They're listening to you. No, that's great. I think in my experience, that's been so important. And even things that you just described, like having those people front and center in the code of conduct with messages is really important. I think that type of stuff hits home for employees. 25 minutes goes really fast, Darryl. As we wrap up, if you could give one piece of advice to compliance professionals really trying to either build, improve, influence their culture of compliance at their companies, what would it be? I know it's hard to say one thing, but what would be your advice?
I think one of the most important things you can do is get out there and talk to employees, understand the concerns, leverage group Slack channels, monitor what's being said on Slack, go to Blind, see what's being said on Blind. Like any information that you can get around what employees are saying in about your company is helpful. Go to Glassdoor, right? Read what people are saying on Glassdoor. All that stuff can help lead you to get an understanding and tone of where your organization is from a cultural perspective and from a compliance perspective. I think it's super important to leverage all the technologies we can to understand employees.
I really appreciate it. Darryl, thanks for the time. This was great. It was a great conversation. I'm looking forward to chatting more with you about this and other things because you clearly know your stuff. So thanks for coming on.
Right on, Mike. It's great to see you again.
And I'll bring Tom in. Tom, I'm sure you enjoyed that. I know you love to hear people who know what they're talking about talk. So I imagine you enjoyed listening
to that. I did,
and
frankly, I learned a lot. So Darryl, I want to thank you. You had some great points. And I really like the way, I don't want to say you're low key, but this is just the way we do business. And we do business this way because we create a culture that is both speak up and listen up. And yes, information can flow down from the CEO to us, to employees, but also back up from the employees to us, to up to the CEO, because you started off by talking about people looking at either code of conduct questions or hotline information or various other strategies to essentially crowdsource information from your own employees. Really enjoyed that. That was great. Really looking forward to this series, Mike, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks, Tom.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the award-winning All Things Investigations. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. All Things Investigation is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.